Hello, hello. So today I thought we would talk a bit about the Buddha's story of Kāḻī and Vedehika from the early tradition. This is a story that I think has a number of lessons we can learn from it. By the way, if you're new to this channel and interested in living a wiser and a kinder and a calmer life, which is one of the ways that stories like this can help, consider subscribing to the channel and click the bell down below if you want to receive notifications when I come out with new videos. Oh, and also, don't forget that I have a new book that's just out, and I will leave a link to that book down below in the show notes as well. It's, I think, a book that will be interesting to all of you, expressing a path of early Buddhism which is really open to everybody and is probably the most complete path that you'll find in the early tradition, although it's very compact in the poem that you find it, and so the book is attempting to fill that out a bit and give you more of an idea of what the Buddha was getting at in this poem. So in any event, this story of Kāḻī and Vedehika, has it ever happened to you that you think you're feeling perfectly calm and equanimous and practicing well and everything's going fine, and you feel like you're sort of on top of the world in a sense, and then suddenly life hits you in the side and you realize that not only that things weren't as good as you thought they were, but that you yourself are not as calm and composed as you hoped you were. I can recall an example in my own past. This is a small example, but I think maybe illustrates the general point, which is that after a day-long talk or sit of some kind, I don't remember exactly what it was, at New York Insight, which is a place where I have gone in the past many times to learn about Buddhism and practice Buddhism, meditation, all kinds of things. And usually after one of these, I'm feeling calm and equanimous and on top of the world, basically. And my wife and I were in a crosswalk in New York, and as happens every so often, there was some clown in a car who was honking at us basically because he wanted to turn even though we were legally in the crosswalk and we had the light. And so I gave him the finger basically, which is a small thing, but the point is that it was before I even had time to think. I, immediately got angry and, I moved out and, nothing more happened on it, but the point is made that I would, if doing anything at that point doesn't help, right? And if I had really been as calm and equanimous internally as I felt that I was, I would have just blown it off. It doesn't matter. Just keep walking and go on to your next thing. But, it just goes to show that when things are going well, we tend to overestimate our own capacities. One story that the Buddha tells from the early tradition of Buddhism illustrates this point quite well. It's the story of Kāḻī and Vedehika. So, as we hear it, basically, Vedehika is a housewife at the time. This is the story from the Buddha. He tells it. And she has a very good reputation. She has a reputation of being calm, of being kind, of being very equanimous, easy to get along with, and so on. However, she has a maid. Bhante Sujato, Bhikkhu Sujato translates the word as bonded maid. Really, it's, to be perfectly honest, it's a slave. There was slavery back in India at the time of the Buddha. And she was a slave maid of Vedehika. Her name was Kāḻī. And Kāḻī was, the only way to put it is Kāḻī was less convinced about the reputation of Vedehika than, let's say, Vedehika's friends and the rest of society. And so Kāḻī decides to test Vedehika. And so the Buddha says, Kāḻī thought, "My mistress has a good reputation as being sweet, even-tempered, and calm. But does she actually have anger in her and just not show it? Or does she have no anger? Or is it just because my work is well organized that she doesn't show anger, even though she still has it inside? Why don't I test my mistress? So this is the crucial difference, we might say, between being, let's say, a normal person who is kind and collected and all the rest, calm, and being somebody who is enlightened. Being somebody who's enlightened, like the Buddha or an Arahant, it means that you don't have the underlying tendency towards anger, or towards greed, or towards delusions of various kinds. Whereas ordinary people, like you and me, well, if we're nice people, if we're good people, we're not going to get angry in ordinary circumstances, but we retain that underlying tendency towards anger, or towards greed for that matter, so that in the right circumstances we will indeed get angry or we'll get greedy. That's the difference. And so what Kāḷī is basically doing here is to say, well, look, let's test Vedehika and see really how, whether or not she's really prone to anger. Now, the background idea here is that during the Buddha's day, somebody in Kāḷī's position, a maid in a family like this, would be expected to get up before dawn so as to prepare the household for when the master and mistress get up. Perhaps she would be cleaning and preparing breakfast or so on. So what Kāḷī decides to do is to get up after dawn. And that, of course, will throw the family into some turmoil. And what happens is, as you might expect, Vedehika confronts Kāḷī and says, in the Pali is translated something like, "What the hell, Kāḷī?" It's a very colloquial expression in Pali. And so she says, what the hell? She gets angry. She gets upset with Kāḻī. Now, this perhaps is sufficient to demonstrate what Kāḻī wanted to know, which is she already knows now that her mistress Vedehika is indeed prone to anger. She's not somebody who is just as calm and collected and kind as it might seem from her reputation. However, Kāḻī decides to press the point. Now, exactly why Kāḻī decides to press the point is something of a question. It's not answered in this sutta. However, it seems as though what Kāḷī's decided to do is basically sacrifice herself, or at least her own well-being, in order to ruin Vedehika's reputation. In other words, in order to demonstrate to the outside world that Vedehika is not the person that she seems to be. And she can't do that just simply by making Vedehika a little bit irritated, because that's not going to prove anything to anybody else. So in any event, what Kāḻī decides to do is to continue getting up later and later in the day, no matter what Vedehika tells her. And so eventually Vedehika gets so upset and so angry that she grabs an iron rod, or a metal rod anyway, and hits Kāḻī over the head. And so Kāḷī's then bleeding profusely, and Kāḻī then runs out and confronts Vedehika's neighbors. And then the Buddha finishes the story by saying, after some time, the housewife Vedehika got this bad reputation. The housewife Vedehika is fierce, ill-tempered, and not calm at all. In the same way, a monastic may be the sweetest of the sweet, the most even-tempered of the even-tempered, the calmest of the calm, so long as they don't encounter any disagreeable criticism. But it's when they encounter disagreeable criticism that you'll know whether they're really sweet, even-tempered, and calm. This is wise counsel from the Buddha, and we can see here now from this quote I've just read the point that the Buddha is trying to make. He's trying to make a point to the monastics that it's very easy to seem like you're awakened, let's say, you're enlightened. It's very easy to seem enlightened, as though you are the calmest of the calm when things go well. The problem is when things don't go well, when people confront you, when people push you in various respects, when people are angry towards you. That's when, the expression is that's when your true colors show. But I think that that's a little bit too, perhaps too cynical to say that our true colors are nastiness or something like that. The point in early Buddhism, the point of the idea of non-self, is that we don't really have true colors in this way. We are malleable depending on the situation we're in. If we're in a good situation, a calm and kind situation, we ourselves find it easy to be calm and kind. However, when we're in more stressful or difficult situations, when we're being confronted by people, clowns in cars honking at us, then we indeed find ourselves not being so calm and kind as we thought we were. So when things go bad, it's much harder to be calm and composed and kind and all the rest. And this brings us to what might be considered the elephant in the room here, which is slavery. What we find here is, of course, Kāḷī is coming from a position of being a slave in this family. And one way that life can be hard, that things can be difficult for us, is if there are structural types of injustice in the world or in our society that make things difficult for us personally. In a sense, we can say that systems of bondage or injustice like this implicitly harm everybody. They make things, of course, most difficult for those who are in positions that are unjust, that are in positions of bondage like Kāḷī is or was. But also, for people in positions of privilege, it makes it very hard for them to see properly, because they are essentially always in a situation of delusion, where they expect or believe that their privilege is somehow justified, when it's not, when it simply is the way the society has been set up, because in truth, there is no justifiable difference between Vedehika and Kāḷī that makes Kāḻī a slave and Vedehika not a slave, or the owner of the slave, let's say. And people who are in positions like Vedehika, positions of privilege, then will find it very easy to be happy and kind and composed and calm as long as their privilege isn't threatened. As long as we don't point out to them that their privilege isn't really owned in a way, and that perhaps things could be done a little bit differently. Once that is pointed out, which implicitly is sort of what Kāḻī is doing in this story, once that is pointed out to them, then of course the calm and kindness evaporates. And so this is something of a subtext that is in this story that I think shouldn't be overlooked. And to that end, I did an earlier video on right speech and issues of social justice, how we can pursue right speech at the same time that we try to make the world a better and more just place. And I'll leave a link to that video up here on the screen if you haven't seen it. Thanks to all of my patrons over on Patreon. I couldn't do this without you. And thanks, of course, to all of you for watching. We'll catch you on the next video. And meanwhile, all of you, be well.